What's up, everybody? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can always follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL, and you can always follow the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. Thanks as always for joining me. We've got a decent amount to discuss. We had Matt LaFleur's season-ending press conference. We had some coaching news with Nathaniel Hackett. We had some GM news in Chicago. I want to go over my grades for the defense, which, spoiler alert, were freaking amazing. So we'll get to that in just a moment. But let's start off with the news and notes and the major takeaways from Matt LaFleur's press conference. First thing started off with was Mo Drayton and whether or not Mo Drayton will be back next season. A little bit of an expected answer here from Matt, and the fact that he said they haven't had a chance to really even get to that point in the discussions. Did make mention of the fact of if they have to make difficult decisions to make the team better moving forward, they would certainly do so, but nowhere near making that sort of determination or decision. So it may take a little bit of time. He definitely didn't say unequivocally no or ruling that out. He's not going to be back or or he will be back, or he didn't say he's not going to be back. Made no determination whatsoever. And that's still going to be something to keep an eye on. I will say it. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I do not believe that Mo Drayton will be back. I would be beyond shocked if Mo Drayton is going to be back next season. That's not, again, me cheering on his firing. I hope that no matter what happens, he lands on his feet. Like I said, I'm always cheering for everyone that ever dons green and gold in any capacity. Coach, scout, GM, player. I hope they all end up in the Hall of Fame somehow. That's my hope. Hope they all get paid. I hope they're unbelievably successful. But when you get a job in the NFL, you get hired to get fired. Whether you're a player, whether you're a coach, whether you're a scout, whether you're a GM, more often than not, you're going to get fired at some point, or released, or cut, or traded, etc. It's the name of the business. And based on how the special teams performed, it was a fair first question to have asked of Matt LaFleur if Mo Drayton will be back or not. And like I said, still expect that to be a resounding no, but nothing imminent as of this point. Of course, then the next line of questioning went to Aaron Rodgers and whether or not Aaron Rodgers will be back next season. Now, before we get into that, this is an insanely important question for a variety of reasons. So there's four universes that could sort of play out in the multiverse of what could happen of Aaron Rodgers this offseason, right? 3 of those are him no longer with the team. One of them is with the team. The decision matrix, if you will, or the matrix if you're plotting it out. The one where he comes back is both the Packers want him back and Aaron Rodgers wants to be back in Green Bay. The other options, retirement. There's an option where Green Bay doesn't want him back. And then there's an option where Green Bay does want him back, but Aaron Rodgers wants to play elsewhere and sort of forces his way out. So 4 different scenarios. Only one of them ends with him in Green Bay. But the very first, apparently, if we're taking Matt LaFleur at his word, the very first thing that we needed to know is whether or not Green Bay even wanted Aaron Rodgers back. Now, it would have been a pretty tough press conference for Matt LaFleur to come out and be like, we're probably going to move in a different direction. I don't think even if that's what they wanted to do, I'm not sure that he comes out and says in this press conference, yeah, we're probably going to move on from Aaron. It was never going to happen, right? I don't know, crazier things have happened, I guess, but I would have been pretty shocked if he came out and said that. But a couple of things that were noteworthy here. One, he mentioned that he does expect Aaron Rodgers to be a Packer. And I think the biggest takeaway here, and the one that I thought was very telling, is he said that Russ Ball, Brian Gutekunst, Mark Murphy, and himself are all on the same page with this decision, that everyone in the building wants Aaron Rodgers back at quarterback. So that is a very important distinction to make. This isn't Matt LaFleur, because I think, that's sometimes why you have these separations, right? Matt LaFleur can go out and say, yeah, as a coach, I want to coach Aaron Rodgers, and that's going to be, where my thoughts are and things like that. While in the back end, Brian Gutekunst and Russ Ball can be looking at it and say, yeah, there's no chance he's going to be back. And then they figure that out down the road. But it sounds like everyone is in lockstep that they want Aaron Rodgers to be the quarterback in 2022. So if we're taking him at face value, if we are believing what he is saying, which I genuinely do, who knows? Plans change. I will say that. If I could say one thing about this entire Aaron Rodgers situation, I would say in bold print, plans can change. There's a lot of offseason left. To borrow Aaron Rodgers, a lot of ball game left, a lot of offseason, or Aaron Nagler's a lot of ball game left, a lot of offseason left in this scenario. But if we're taking him at face value, They very much want Aaron Rodgers to be back in 2022, 2023 as the starting quarterback, as the leader of the pack, and taking them hopefully back into another playoff situation and beyond this upcoming season. He also mentioned that he does not expect this to be like last offseason. He doesn't expect there to be this long drawn out drama. And he went on and on, not on and on, but he went on in a couple different scenarios about how there seems to be a much greater line of communication between the team and the quarterback, which I've said all along. When you want to go back to last offseason, the whole issue started with breakdowns in communication, and it seems like those no longer exist. And I believe him as well that I don't think this is going to be a replay of 2021's offseason where just everything was insane, right? So we'll see, but still to be determined overall exactly what happens, but very clear that in this press conference, they're saying they want him back. Now, the only thing that I will add here, and again, I want to be very clear, I take Matt LaFleur at his word for this. I believe he's telling the truth here. But it very much would behoove Green Bay to say that they want him back, even if they don't. So first of all, if you're talking about trade value and things of that nature, if all of a sudden Green Bay says we're not on the same page and there's all of a sudden drama again with Rodgers, it could put some other teams off and raise questions and be like, all right, this is going on again with this guy. He's not exactly had the quietest season from an off the field standpoint. I'm not saying that there's anything that makes him untradeable or that takes away his MVP year or anything like that. There would be high demand, but there have been some issues going back a year now, both the drama in the offseason, some of the drama in season. If all of a sudden there was more drama, it could be off-putting to a team that would maybe want to trade for him. So Green Bay would benefit by saying that like everything's great and they want him back. That could theoretically push up trade value and trade prices for other teams. And that could push other teams to call Green Bay and offer things rather than Green Bay having to try to shop him around the league. So that is a benefit. It's also a benefit if Rodgers is ultimately traded and it looks like Rodgers is the guy that wants out. Nobody wants the blood on their hands of moving on from an MVP Hall of Fame franchise quarterback. Ted Thompson had to live with that, and he got that right and moved on to Aaron Rodgers. But even that's a tough pill to swallow for anyone. Even Thompson had struggles with that and having to go on from Brett Favre. There's a lot of drama that surrounded that decision. As a GM, you don't want to necessarily be that guy as a front office. You don't want to be the team that pushed away the franchise hero, if you will. If they say they want him back, and then Rodgers is the one that says we're just not eye to eye or something, it looks like Rodgers is the guy that wants out. And that's totally different. Now, much more fans would, side with Green Bay and say, listen, if Rodgers wants out, then he can go. But if it's LaFleur and Gutekunst that say we're probably going to move on, then they become the heels in that situation and Aaron Rodgers sort of becomes the face. So like I said, I believe Matt LaFleur here. I think he's legitimately telling the truth. You never quite know. But again, if he's at face value, it seems like they want Aaron Rodgers back, and that's what I'm taking it as at this point. He also made mention of the fact that he believes that they can get a lot of their guys back, and he wants as many guys back, quote, as humanly possible. He did also mention that there are going to have to be some very difficult decisions along the way. And I read to you the list of all the players that may have played their final game in Green Bay. There are going to be cap casualties here. There are going to be players who will not play again as a Green Bay Packer. I think Zadarius Smith is probably the easiest example of that, but there will be plenty of others. However, it did sound very much, and Matt LaFleur said this as well, they are not looking towards a rebuild. They do not want to rebuild this team. And he also made mention of the fact that they can, he basically let out the word manipulate and said that's not exactly what he wanted to say, but manipulate salary and money to move around to be able to keep some of these players. And he's absolutely right. Green Bay can do that. He can't keep everyone, and there's going to have to be, again, those tough decisions, those concessions that are ultimately made. Like I said, there will be salary cap casualties, but if they want to open a window longer and do another sort of all-in season, they can do that. It's a credit card. The salary cap is ultimately a credit card. You are borrowing from the future. And I talked a little bit about this yesterday. People can say, well, you can just keep borrowing from the future. There is an extent where it does catch up with you. there is an extent where you can only borrow from so many future caps. You can't go like 10 years into the future to borrow caps. There is a limit to that. But more importantly, as you borrow from future caps, it gives you less flexibility to bring in free agents. It gives you less flexibility to be, sort of balanced and being able to have a mixture of keeping your own guys, bringing in guys, having draft picks, etc. It puts that all sort of out of whack, as we saw last year. Green Bay only had room for a few, minuscule free agents, which they all hit. Devondre Campbell, Rasul Douglas in season, Corey Bojorquez, Dennis Kelly, that group of players hit, but it limits the ability to bring in those sort of players. And then ultimately, as I mentioned before, what Green Bay is going to go against this season is they're going to be, like 40 million under the cap to start things off with like 30 guys under contract. They're going to have to do a lot of maneuvering. And the clear thing is like, well, you can borrow from the future. And yes, you can. However, there will be teams that have $80 million in cap space to go out and sign players, keep their own players, etc. And they could theoretically do all the same things that the Packers are doing to borrow from future caps as well, to sign tons of free agents or completely remake their team. And that's a little bit of a less likely scenario, that some team's going to just go completely bonkers in one free agency. However, as we've seen and as we know, there's going to be a handful of good teams that are starting to go in almost every single season. We're going to see it with the Chiefs. We've seen it with the Buccaneers when Brady has been there. We're going to see this over and over. And if Green Bay is operating at a cost 40 million, 50, 60 million below what some of those other teams who are also going all in on the season are doing, and they also have really good rosters, Green Bay becomes at a very big disadvantage. So it does behoove you at some point to get that balanced and to make sure that you're not just constantly in this crazy state of borrowing from the future to try to put the best team on the field now. And Ted Thompson and Ron Wolf were amazing at that. However, a lot of people wanted Thompson specifically to have more of these all-in moments and say, we're going to go out and we're really going to sign guys. We're not going to worry about the future. We're going to try to win right now. Brian Gutekunst has done that. He may do that again for the next couple seasons. That is well within the realm of possibility. Matt LaFleur's not wrong there. There will be some players gone, but it seems like, based on Matt LaFleur's comments here, that that's the direction they're heading. And again, as I think I said yesterday, I'm good with either all in or a sell. The middle is the worst place you can be when building a franchise. It is the absolute worst. So if they want to keep the window open with Aaron Rodgers and go in that direction, see if they can get a lot of their core pieces back. We saw the defense start to come together. I think if you have Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers and the potential of that offensive line and what that can be, you have the ability to be a good offense. They're going to have Jones. They're going to have Dillon. They have pieces already that if LaFleur and Rodgers are there, they're going to be able to piecemeal together a good enough offense that if their defense can stay consistent and they can improve on special teams, that they could compete again come next season. So I'm good with that. But if all of a sudden they're out on Rodgers or they want to go in a different direction, and that scenario, in my opinion, they need to do a much harder rebuild and rip the Band-Aid as much as they can possibly do. He also made mention, going back to Matt LaFleur's press conference, of playing starters on special teams or maybe playing some of their more important players on special teams. Now, he made very clear, he said we did a little bit more of that in this game. A.J. Dillon was out there on special teams, and guess what happened? A.J. Dillon got hurt on special teams. So there's risk there too. But I was watching this, and what if I told you that the team next year was going to be centered around Oren Burks and Isaiah McDuffie and Tyler Davis and Dominique Daphne and Isaac Yiadom and those sort of players? You would say, that's a bad team. That's going to be a bad football team. But those are the guys, your Tyler Lancasters on kick block, and those are your guys that are out there on special teams every time. You'll see a Rasul Douglas out there from time to time. You'll see, like I said, an A.J. Dillon. You'll see a couple guys here and there that will make an appearance. But for the most part, this is a group of the bottom of your roster, with no due disrespect meant, a step above XFL players that are playing when your special teams are on the field. And there's like 11 of them out there at any given time. You're playing with fire when you're going out and you're playing guys that are very, very, very fringe roster guys. It just is what it is. So we are seeing it become more in vogue to use starting caliber players. Maybe not your Devontae Adams, maybe not, but we saw Deebo Samuel on a kick return for the 49ers. Matt LaFleur made mention of that as well, that the 49ers had a lot of their starters on special teams. If I had to guess, I would believe that that's a direction that Matt LaFleur will go in moving forward. You just lost maybe the biggest game in the last 3 seasons. Arguably, the both NFC Championship games were bigger, but this was probably your best team because of special teams. So they have to make changes there, and Matt LaFleur made mention that that could be adding some starting caliber players to that special teams unit moving forward. I also had the chance to ask him about David Bakhtiari and if he thought that this would be a long-term injury. He said he does not believe it is going to be. He didn't seem like 1,000,000% confident in that. There seemed a little bit of hesitation in his voice. But I think he's basically just saying, like, in this scenario, everyone's body is different, and they've been hopeful this entire time, and they haven't had him back yet, other than 27 snaps against Detroit. So based on the medical reports that he's seen from the team doctors and from outside specialists, they believe that he's going to make a full recovery and that this is not a long-term issue. He didn't think anyone in the organization, nor Bakhtiari, nor anyone involved in the process did anything wrong that set David Bakhtiari back. He said David Bakhtiari worked his ass off, and it just didn't work out. But his words, he doesn't believe there's going to be anything long-term for Bakhtiari, but that's going to be a story when OTAs and mini camps kick off next year. Also mentioned that if Nathaniel Hackett does get a head coaching job, that they will go internal for the offensive coordinator position. Didn't say what direction, didn't lay out his plan, of course, and said it would be a very difficult decision. You would think that would come down to Getsy and Stenovich, but he did mention that they would for sure go internal if, in fact, Hackett does get a job. And, he basically sounded like they'll know sooner rather than later. It almost felt like he's going to have a job soon sort of thing. Tough to read, but that's what I got out of it. But we'll see what happens. But he mentioned that they do have a plan in place, and it will be internal if that ends up happening. And then finally, he ended his press conference with a thank you to the media, an apology. He apologized to the media, but I think he was more apologizing to fans, of course. It was really sincere. If you can go back and watch like the last 2 minutes of that press conference and just hear what Matt LaFleur had to say, Matt LaFleur was stellar that entire press conference, taking ownership. He had multiple opportunities to throw people under the bus and never did so. Green Bay has a great, and I mean great, head coach. And I know you can make an argument that this team, and maybe even Matt LaFleur, has shrunk in some of the biggest moments in NFC Championship games and in this last game against the 49ers. I think you can argue that. I wholeheartedly believe that Matt LaFleur is a tremendous football coach, and he will learn from these mistakes. You would have, maybe liked to have seen him learn from maybe the first couple and had this team a little bit better prepared. I think he's a phenomenal head coach, and I think Green Bay's in phenomenal hands moving forward. Go back and listen to that press conference, and I think you'll get a really good idea as to why. All right, some other quick news and notes here. Paul Brettel of the Pack-A-Day podcast, of course, did report that Kurt Benkert signed to a futures deal, and then Kurt Benkert basically retweeted it out confirming that. So he will be back in green and gold in some capacity this next year. Expect to see the remainder of those future contracts announced probably in the next couple days. Also, Elliott Wolf is gaining some traction to the Bears as their potential GM candidate, or their GM choice, I should say. That would be interesting. He's going for a second interview, and it has been reported that there does seem to be some momentum there. Only time will tell if that happens and if that's a good decision, but interesting nonetheless that there could be a Wolf, and one of the members of the Wolf family, of course, Ron Wolf's son, Elliott, potentially to the Chicago Bears, which not exactly what you want to see, I think, as a Packer fan, but definitely something to keep an eye on. As I was going through tape, and I'm going to get to my defensive grades in a second, but as I was going through the defensive tape this week, one of the things that really struck me is Rasul Douglas, Jair Alexander, and Eric Stokes on the same field at the same time has the opportunity to be just absolutely shut down. Now, None of the three graded out super well. A lot of Stokes and Jair's issue, some of it was in tackling. Rasul had a good game. And, a couple plays late, Jair Alexander allowed an inside pass in a key situation. And then Stokes had a big throw that he allowed to George Kittle that resulted in like a 35-yard gain where he dragged Stokes for about 15 yards after the fact. There's some plays there, but from a pure coverage standpoint, for the majority of the game, Douglas and Jair and Douglas, Jair, and Stokes looked amazing. And it really gave me some feeling that like Rasul should really be prioritized to some extent, because I think that trio has the ability to be something special and make it really difficult to throw against. You add in Kenny Clark and Rashawn Gary at minimum up front, you have the makings of a really good defense. They'd still have to put some pieces around those guys, but really liked how those three played together. It was the first time we got to see it, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to see a lot more of it moving forward. Let's get into grades really quick. My top three graded defensive players from this past week: Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary, and Dean Lowry. Clark and Gary had massive grades. Again, Clark was 1, Gary was 2. If you want to switch those two, I'm not going to fight you at all. I thought both of them were beyond tremendous in this game. And it was, both of them making play after play, resetting the line of scrimmage, setting up other players. They were just phenomenal in this game. And really exciting to see what those two, still so far to go in their prime, what they can do for the defense moving forward. And then Dean Lowry, just what a stud towards the end of this season, really came on strong, also resetting the line of scrimmage, held up well at the point of attack. A big reason why San Francisco struggled to run the majority of the game: Clark, Gary, and Lowry. Those were the three that set the tone for everything else and really set up the defense for success. My bottom three players, the lowest graded, none of them were anything really low, but my lowest was Whitney Merciless. Didn't really do anything as a pass rusher, didn't get much opportunity, was asked to set the edge on a few occasions and just couldn't get it done, which you can imagine with his, arm injury still and recovering from that against a San Francisco team that's ultra physical, it's not a great matchup for him, especially a little bit banged up. Wasn't egregious, wasn't awful, but a couple plays he would have liked to have had back. Eric Stokes was second. Again, the big completion to Kittle and some issues in run defense. He is not a physical tackler. That's something that he needs to get better at. He basically avoids contact when possible. Not ideal, but his coverage makes up for it. And I thought his coverage was good for the most part, other than that play to Kittle. But ended up as my second lowest. And then my third lowest was Oren Burks, based on one play where he biffed a little bit. And that was basically the gist of it. You didn't see much time in the game outside of that. So top three: Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary, Dean Lowry. Bottom three: Whitney Merciless, Eric Stokes, and Oren Burks. Ended up being my highest defensive grade for the defense of the year. I think probably expected, but was clearly the case. Ended up as the highest graded game for the defense all season long. Last but not least, a huge thank you to anyone who listens to our Pack-A-Day podcast over on the audio version. For those of you not familiar, I do this 365 days a year here on the video. We have a whole team that does an audio podcast over on Pack-A-Day on the audio version. So if you're not listening to that, make sure to do so. We hit the top 200 charts in all sports podcasts on Apple this past week, coming in at number 191. So all sports podcasts, you think of the best of the best, we hit the top 200. I'm super proud of the entire team. It's an amazing group of people. If you have not subscribed to the Pack-A-Day podcast, wherever you get your favorite podcasts, even if you just want to support me in some way from listening to this, I've had people reach out this week and say, Andy, how can we support you? Subscribe to this, subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe over on the audio podcasts, and give those a listen, because I think you're really going to enjoy it. And we have an amazing team of people that I cannot thank enough for the work that they do, and really cool to see the numbers that we've been hitting and to see us ranked in the top charts over on Apple. That does it for me today. Thank you for joining me. Of course, I will be right back here tomorrow, I believe with Rachel Hotmeyer, so make sure to check that out. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.